Redditor 1. I still remember that evening in 1996 with a clarity that chills me to this day. I was 8 years old, and as the daylight began to fade over northeastern Pennsylvania, the sky transformed into a deepening blue, one that wasn't entirely dark yet, but hinted at the coming night. I sat on the cool, smooth floor of our large sunroom, surrounded by towering windows that framed the outside world like a living painting. I was busy arranging my Legos into castles and spaceships, though I hardly paid attention to my play, as my young mind was restless and full of wanderlust. It was during one of those frequent breaks from my building that something caught my eye. I remember standing up and moving over to one of the bigger windows, drawn by an unusual glow on the horizon. There, high in the slowly darkening sky, was a shape that defied every notion of normalcy. It resembled a large triangle with softly rounded sides, a shape too deliberate, too precise to be a mere airplane or weather balloon. The object hovered there in eerie silence, not moving quickly at all. Its presence was punctuated by a low, almost imperceptible rumble that vibrated in the air, a sound that I felt deep in my bones rather than heard with my ears. At each of the three corners, pink lights flickered in a distinct sequence: left, top, right, left, top, right. Each pulse deliberate and rhythmic. Dominating the center was a brilliant white light that faded in and out slowly, like a heartbeat of an otherworldly creature. The entire spectacle lasted no more than 15 seconds, yet in that brief moment, time itself seemed to slow down as I absorbed every unsettling detail. I remember my heart pounding fiercely as I watched, a mix of wonder and terror swirling inside me. When the object vanished, it wasn't with a dramatic burst or a sudden dash across the sky. It simply disappeared, as if someone had quietly pulled a curtain over it, erasing it from view. The blue of the evening returned. The clouds resumed their lazy drift, and for a few precious moments, nothing seemed out of place. But I knew something had shifted in that instant, something that left an indelible mark on my young soul. I ran to find my mother, my voice trembling as I recounted what I had witnessed. "Mom, look, there was something in the sky," I pleaded, my words rushed and desperate. She followed me outside, her hand gently squeezing mine in reassurance as we both craned our necks upward. But as we stared into the expanse of the early night, nothing abnormal remained. Only the usual quiet of a Pennsylvania evening. She smiled softly, as if to dismiss my words as a product of my overactive imagination. Yet, even as she reassured me, I could tell that a part of her wondered if there was more to my story than I dared to admit. In the following days, I found it impossible to forget that strange, silent visitor. Every time dusk fell, my mind would wander back to that moment, replaying the flickering pink lights and the pulsing white glow with a precision that defied explanation. I began to notice little details that once went unnoticed: a subtle, unexplained chill on an otherwise warm night, shadows that seemed to move just beyond the edge of vision, and an occasional, distant rumble that echoed faintly in the stillness. These small anomalies blurred the line between memory and nightmare, leaving me questioning whether I had been the unwitting witness to something truly extraordinary or simply the victim of a vivid, unsettling illusion. School and daily life carried on as they always did, but I was never quite the same. I started to keep a small notebook, filling its pages with sketches and scribbled notes about the odd occurrences I began to notice. There were entries about creaks in the floor when the house was empty, reflections in the window that didn't match the room behind them, and nights when I would lie awake, listening for that familiar low hum. My friends laughed off my stories as childish fancy, and even my parents rarely mentioned that mysterious evening again. Yet, in the solitude of the night, the memory of that hovering triangle would resurface, each recollection laced with a dread that felt far too real. Sometimes, when the moon was hidden behind thick clouds and the night grew unnervingly silent, I would hear that soft, almost hypnotic rumble once more. It was as if the universe had left behind a trace of that inexplicable presence, a reminder that what I had seen was not a figment of my imagination. On those nights, I would press my ear against the cool glass of my bedroom window, straining to catch the sound. My heart would thud painfully in my chest, and I'd imagine that somewhere out there, beyond the reach of ordinary sight, the triangle might be watching, waiting for its moment to return. Even now, when I catch a glimpse of the twilight sky, that memory stirs inside me, a silent question of whether the night holds secrets that the world is too busy to notice. I still feel the residual chill of that experience, an echo of a distant encounter that seems to belong to another realm. I have grown up, yet the lines between childhood wonder and lingering terror remain blurred, and the night sky continues to whisper of mysteries that defy explanation. There are moments when I wonder if that eerie, unearthly visitor was a solitary phenomenon, a brief, fleeting glimpse into something vast and unknowable, or if it was merely the first sign of a presence that has followed me ever since. The thought sends shivers down my spine, and I often find myself glancing upward, half expecting to see a familiar glow among the stars. It is a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary moments can hide the darkest secrets, and that the boundaries between the real and the inexplicable are often far thinner than we dare to imagine. I keep that memory close, tucked away like a secret shared only with the night. And in the quiet moments before sleep, when the world is hushed and the darkness feels almost tangible, I allow myself to wonder if someday that silent observer might return, if the triangle, with its mesmerizing lights and eerie hum, might once again reveal itself in the twilight, blurring the lines between my past and the mysteries that still linger in the dark. Hey everyone, if you found this channel gripping and want more real stories, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you're always in the loop. Redditor 2. There is a night I'll always remember, a night that still sends shivers down my spine. A few years ago in Florida, my great-aunt and great-uncle had come all the way from Ohio to visit. My great-uncle was a passionate space enthusiast, and his prized possession was a magnificent telescope he'd brought along. I had always been fascinated by the stars, so when he suggested we set up his telescope to look at some planets, I felt a thrill of excitement mixed with a hint of apprehension. That humid Florida evening, the air was thick with the scent of salt and damp earth, and the sky was a deepening blue, gradually yielding to the approaching night. We were in the street, carefully positioning the telescope and setting up a camera to capture our view of the heavens. The street lights, though modest, added an eerie glow to the scene. My great-uncle, ever the perfectionist, insisted that I go inside and turn off the lights at the front of the house because they interfered with the delicate optics of his telescope. I obeyed, my small hands fumbling with the switch, unaware that I was about to witness something that would blur the lines between reality and the unknown. When I returned outside, a chill ran down my spine for reasons I couldn't yet understand. The familiar scene had shifted in an unsettling way. My great-uncle was nowhere to be seen. The space where he had stood was empty, and a sudden gust of wind rattled the leaves and scattered loose papers on the pavement. I paused, my heart thumping loudly in my chest, as I tried to reconcile the abrupt absence of his reassuring presence with the eerie silence that had descended around me. Then I saw it, a luminous blue light hovering in the sky, positioned perfectly between two shifting clouds. It was enormous and otherworldly, a stark contrast to the usual dim glimmer of distant stars. The light pulsed softly, radiating an intensity that was almost hypnotic. It was as if the sky had been transformed into a living canvas, and that brilliant blue hue was the sole brushstroke defying nature's palette. The object moved slowly, deliberately, as if it were scanning the earth below, its presence both mesmerizing and terrifying. For a few agonizing seconds, 4, maybe 5, the light held its silent vigil over the street. The wind, which had roared moments before, suddenly subsided, leaving an oppressive stillness in its wake. I stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling every second stretch out into an eternity. My mind raced. Was it a trick of the light? A glitch in my eyes after the sudden change from brightness to darkness? Or was it something far more inexplicable? A visitor from a realm beyond our understanding. My pulse hammered in my ears as I strained to process the scene. The blue light was unlike anything I had ever seen, and the way it lingered between the clouds defied all logic. It was as though the light existed in a space between worlds, not entirely part of our reality. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to run, yet I was transfixed, caught in the grip of a surreal dread that seemed to seep into my very bones. I turned my gaze back to the street, half expecting to see my great-uncle reappear as if nothing had happened. To my relief, there he was, standing nonchalantly as if he had been part of the scenery all along. His casual demeanor did little to soothe the disquiet swirling in my mind. When I asked him if he had seen the blue light, he merely shrugged and laughed, dismissing my trembling recollection with a teasing remark that called me a goof, but his light-hearted dismissal only deepened the mystery in my heart. That night, long after the blue light had vanished and the wind had returned to its ordinary rhythm, I lay awake in my room, haunted by the memory of that fleeting encounter. The image of the immense blue glow lingered in my mind, a stark reminder that beneath the familiar surface of our everyday lives, there lay secrets waiting to be discovered. I couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary, something inexplicable, had brushed against our world, leaving behind only questions and a sense of unease. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn to the night sky in a way I never had before. Every shift in the clouds, every gust of wind made my heart skip a beat as I scanned the heavens for another glimpse of that mysterious blue presence. I began to keep a small journal, jotting down every detail I could remember, the precise sequence of events, the way the wind howled just before the light appeared, and even the subtle change in temperature that had accompanied it all. Each entry was a desperate attempt to capture the fleeting terror of that moment, as if writing it down might somehow contain the unknown. My friends dismissed my recollections as the overactive imaginings of a curious mind, and even my family seemed to treat the incident as a trivial oddity, a mere quirk of nature on a warm Floridian night. Yet deep inside, I knew that what I had witnessed was more than just a play of light and wind. It was as if the cosmos had decided to reveal a secret, one that was too vast and mysterious for anyone to fully comprehend. I often wondered if that blue light was a solitary event, or if it was part of a larger, unfathomable phenomenon, a silent, spectral presence that moved through the night, unseen by most, but ever watchful. In the quiet moments before sleep, when the world outside grew still and the shadows lengthened, I would lie in bed with the memory of that night echoing in my mind. I imagined the blue light returning, perhaps on another windy evening, to cast its eerie glow upon the world once more. The thought filled me with a mix of dread and longing, a desire to understand the unfathomable, even as it terrified me to no end. Years have passed since that strange night, yet the memory remains as vivid as if it had happened just yesterday. The blue light, the sudden disappearance and reappearance of my great-uncle, the unnatural hush that fell over the street. Each element has woven itself into the fabric of my being. It serves as a constant reminder that the universe is full of mysteries, some of which are meant to be experienced rather than explained. And so, whenever I find myself beneath a darkening sky, I pause and look up, my eyes scanning the heavens for any sign of that enigmatic glow. The ordinary now seems imbued with an undercurrent of the extraordinary, a whisper of the unknown that lies just beyond our understanding. Even as I continue with the routines of everyday life, the memory of that night lingers, a silent testament to the fact that sometimes the most unremarkable moments can unveil secrets that change us forever. Redditor 3. I still remember that night from middle school with an intensity that haunts me to this day. I was in my room, lying in bed with a large window stretching along the foot of it. The soft hum of the night and the comforting glow of my bedside lamp had always made the darkness feel almost friendly. But that night, something shattered that fragile sense of safety. I had just drifted off when a loud, jarring rumble ripped through the silence. A sound like a jet streaking over your house, only far closer and far more unnerving. The noise was accompanied by a blinding light that burst through the blinds, momentarily flooding my room with an unearthly glow. I sat bolt upright, my heart thundering in my chest, as I fumbled for the comfort of my blanket. Unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, I scrambled to the window and pulled back the blinds. Outside, suspended in the dark sky, was an aircraft unlike anything I had ever seen. It was enormous, at least the size of 2 or 3 small houses, and its form was disturbingly geometric. The craft was shaped like a perfect triangle, its edges curving gently as if molded by an unseen force. At each vertex of the triangle, there was a circular platform, each one adorned with 3 lights arranged in a precise triangular formation. The lights pulsed rhythmically, their glow intensifying with each beat of the low, continuous rumble that vibrated through the air. The object moved with an eerie deliberation, its progress so slow it was as if time itself had been suspended. For what felt like an eternity, though it was really only 4 or 5 seconds, the craft hovered silently above my house, casting strange shadows on the pavement below. The brilliant light illuminated every detail of my room, turning familiar objects into distorted silhouettes against the brightness. Frozen by a terror I couldn't comprehend, I couldn't tear my eyes away. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, but I was too captivated by the unexplainable sight before me. The combination of that overwhelming light and the deep, resonant rumble seemed to stretch into the very depths of my being, embedding a fear that would linger long after the object had vanished. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, the craft was gone. The light faded, the rumbling died down, and an oppressive silence returned to the night. I sat there trembling in the darkness, trying to make sense of what I had witnessed. In the days that followed, I questioned every detail, the perfect triangle, the circular platforms with their arranged lights, and that inexplicable, slow, deliberate movement. But no answer ever came. Redditor 4. I was driving out on one of those endless Forest Service roads in central Arizona a couple of years ago, the kind of road that twists through the dark, silent stretches of the desert. It was around 9 p.m. and the air carried a cool, dry stillness that only a desert night can bring. My friends and I had taken a break from our long drive to rest at a giant boulder that jutted out of the barren landscape. We climbed up onto it, settling in to enjoy the vast, starry expanse that spread out before us, a moment of camaraderie and quiet wonder under the open sky. I remember how the soft murmur of our conversation blended with the natural sounds of the desert, the faint rustle of dry brush, the whisper of a gentle wind, and the distant call of nocturnal creatures. It was all so ordinary, so familiar, but as we sat there, laughing and sharing stories, something in the heavens began to change. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a peculiar orange light, as bright and distinct as a star, hanging silently in the sky. At first, it was just a small point of light, seemingly static amid the vast darkness. Then, as if awakened by some unspoken command, the light started to move. It darted erratically, zipping across the sky in all directions, as though it were chasing a secret only it could comprehend. I stared, transfixed and bewildered, as the light's pace grew more frantic with each passing second. Before long, a second, identical light appeared beside it, and together they began to perform a strange, mesmerizing dance, a duet of luminescence that defied every rational explanation. The lights traced a pattern across the horizon, moving back and forth over what felt like 1/6 of a circular arc that framed our view of the desert. Their motion was erratic and swift, yet measured, as if each burst of speed was part of an intricate plan. I could see no sound accompanying their movement, no whir of machinery, no hum of engines, only the silent, almost eerie display of these orange beacons against the midnight canvas. I exchanged uneasy glances with my friends. We all knew the night sky better than most. Growing up in an age of constant exposure to technology, we were familiar with the predictable paths of airplanes and the slow, steady drift of satellites. Yet nothing could have prepared us for the inexplicable spectacle unfolding above. The silence was profound, a silence so complete that even the wind seemed to hold its breath, leaving us in a state of heightened awareness and inexplicable dread. For several minutes, those lights danced with a wild abandon that both terrified and fascinated me. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, every beat echoing in the quiet void around us. My mind raced with possibilities. Had we stumbled upon some clandestine military experiment, or was it something altogether otherworldly? The lights twisted and looped, their paths defying the laws of gravity and common sense, each movement deliberate and unnervingly graceful. I remember the heat of the desert slowly giving way to a cool chill, as if the very air had been altered by their presence. The surreal display left us all momentarily speechless. We sat there on that ancient rock, our faces illuminated by the intermittent glow of the mysterious lights, wondering if we had just witnessed a trick of nature, an optical illusion born of the desert's vast emptiness. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the lights accelerated. In one fluid, breathtaking motion, they shot off in the same direction, vanishing into the blackness of the sky with a speed that defied comprehension. The silence returned immediately, as though the desert had exhaled a long-held secret and then swallowed it back up. For a moment, I sat there, frozen, trying to grasp what had just occurred, my senses overloaded by the abrupt shift from wonder to emptiness. My friends slowly recovered from the shock, exchanging incredulous looks, and murmured, "What in the duck was that?" Their voices were low and hesitant, as if speaking too loudly might somehow summon that inexplicable phenomenon back into existence. I wanted to answer, to offer some semblance of explanation, but the sheer strangeness of the event left me grasping for words that wouldn't do it justice. In the days that followed, that night on the boulder became a lingering memory, a silent enigma that refused to be explained. I found myself haunted by the image of those vibrant dancing lights, replaying their erratic movements in my mind during moments of solitude. I would catch myself glancing upward on clear nights, half expecting to see a flash of orange or a hint of that impossible motion against the tapestry of stars. The desert had always held a certain magic for me, a beauty laced with danger and mystery, but that encounter added a layer of unease to its charm. It was as if the night had offered us a glimpse into a hidden realm, one where the rules of physics bent and the cosmos revealed a secret meant only for the brave few who dared to look. I often wondered if those lights were a solitary anomaly, a brief interlude in the natural order, or if they were part of a larger, unfathomable phenomenon that skirted the edges of our reality. Even now, whenever I drive along those quiet, deserted roads of central Arizona, a chill runs down my spine as I recall that surreal night. The desert's vast expanse seems to whisper of secrets and hidden wonders, of truths too profound for our everyday understanding. I continue to search the skies, driven by a mixture of awe and trepidation, ever mindful of the possibility that those dancing orange lights might one day reappear, reminding me once more that the universe holds mysteries far beyond the grasp of ordinary reason. Redditor 5. My wife, ever the pragmatic one, casually recounted an incident from her teenage years, a story that, despite lacking any overt signs of the paranormal, still gnaws at my mind like an unsolvable riddle. She was only 14 or 15, spending the night at a friend's house with a handful of her closest friends. They were a tight-knit group, all of them light sleepers who never once stirred at the slightest hint of disturbance. Yet that night, something happened that defies every logical explanation. It began with an ordinary evening. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that wraps around you like a well-worn blanket. After a long day filled with the trivialities of youth, the girls drifted off to sleep in separate rooms, trusting in the safety of familiar walls and the warmth of shared confidences. No one suspected that the night would unravel into a mystery that would haunt them for years to come. When morning finally broke, they awoke with a disorienting shock. In the dim light of early dawn, they found themselves sprawled out on the cool, damp earth of an orange grove, over a mile away from the house where they had last fallen asleep. The grove was vast and silent, its rows of fruit-laden trees bathed in the soft glow of the rising sun. It was as if they had been transported there by some invisible force. No one recalled any attempt to leave. They were all deep sleepers, far too light of slumber to wander off by mere accident. There were no signs of forced movement or tampering with their beds, no evidence of a struggle or a hasty escape. The girls were simply there, their minds fogged with the remnants of sleep, and their bodies resting in an alien landscape far from the safety of home. Even as a teenager, my wife was known for her clarity and lucidity upon waking, a stark contrast to the hazy state of most sleepwalkers. Yet, that morning, every detail of their predicament was etched in their memories with unnerving precision. They recalled the feel of the dew-soaked grass beneath them, the distant rustle of orange leaves stirred by a gentle breeze, and the overwhelming sense of dislocation. It was as if their bodies had been moved against their will, while their minds remained locked in the oblivion of sleep. The incident defied every rule of logic that they had been taught to trust. Over the years, she has shared this story with the same nonchalance that one might recount a funny dream. With a wry smile and a shake of her head, she dismisses it as an odd, inexplicable anomaly, something to be laughed about in the glow of maturity. But I can't help but be consumed by a relentless curiosity. I've spent countless sleepless nights turning the incident over in my mind, desperate to unearth any rational explanation that might bridge the gap between reality and the inexplicable. It might have predicted my destiny, but to seek the unfathomable and sort the meaning out of that, what force could have moved 5 girls from one location to another without a sound, without a trace, and without leaving them any wiser about the mechanics of their own bodies? In the quiet moments of our mornings together, as she prepares for the day with a casual grace that belies the oddity of her past, I find myself silently questioning everything I thought I knew about the boundaries of human experience. Was it possible that there was a subtle manipulation at work? An unseen hand that could bend the very fabric of reality just enough to uproot them from their beds and deposit them into an orange grove? I imagine the scene with a clarity that borders on the surreal, the soft murmur of the night, the low hum of the sleeping house, and then, in a blink, the abrupt transition to a world where the ordinary laws of physics seem to falter. The image haunts me. I picture the girls, huddled together in bewildered silence, their minds racing as they tried to make sense of the impossible journey. The bright hues of the grove contrasted sharply with the somber, lingering darkness of the night they'd left behind. And in that stark light, every whispered question and every muted gasp became a testament to the fragility of their understanding. It wasn't just the physical dislocation that troubled me. It was the profound, unsettling feeling that something fundamental had shifted in that moment. Something that challenged the very core of what we consider to be true. I have asked her and her remaining friends about that night, seeking any fragment of explanation that might restore some sense of normalcy to the incident. They all agree on one point. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't a case of sleepwalking, and it certainly wasn't a prank or a figment of youthful imagination. Their recollections are unwavering, as if the experience had been etched into their souls. It's as though that night had imprinted a secret on them, a shared understanding of an event that defies conventional explanation. And while they treat it with the levity of an inside joke, something to be chuckled over in the quiet moments of nostalgia, I remain fixated on its mystery. I've spent days poring over old articles and scientific journals, desperate to find any mention of similar phenomena. I've called experts and even visited local archives, hoping that somewhere, hidden in a forgotten page, there might be a clue. Yet the more I search, the more I'm drawn back to the unresolved questions. How could 5 teenagers, sound asleep in a safe, familiar environment, be moved over a mile away without any awareness of the journey? Why would such an occurrence be dismissed so casually by those who experienced it firsthand? And most disturbingly, what does it say about the boundaries of our own reality that the inexplicable can slip through the cracks of our everyday lives without so much as a whisper? Every night, as I lie awake in the dark, the unanswered questions echo in the silence. I find myself wondering if there is a hidden realm, a parallel world, or some form of energy manipulation that we have yet to comprehend. A realm where the laws of nature are not fixed, where the ordinary becomes extraordinary in the blink of an eye. In the quiet hours before dawn, I feel that same disquiet, that same hunger for understanding that has driven me for years. It's a pursuit that has, in many ways, defined my life ever since I first heard my wife's story. And so, while she laughs off the incident with a carefree grace, I am left with the unyielding question: what truly happened that night? The mystery endures, a silent specter lurking in the shadows of memory, a reminder that some truths, no matter how bizarre or unsettling, are destined to remain forever just out of reach. Redditor 6. I was driving along a lonely highway in northern Arizona during the summer of '96, the kind of endless road that slices through a vast sun-baked desert. The late afternoon light was softening into the muted hues of early evening, and the world outside my windshield felt both immense and intimate. A quiet expanse where every shadow and glint of light whispered secrets of distant places. That day the desert seemed unusually still, as if holding its breath in anticipation. I remember the rhythmic hum of my engine and the steady pulse of the tires on the cracked asphalt, each moment blending into the next in a seamless journey. The air, still warm from the day's heat, carried a slight chill as the sun began its slow descent behind rugged mountains in the distance. As I rounded a bend where the road curved gently away from the horizon, something caught my eye. a gleam that stood out against the barren landscape. There, a short distance off the road, lay a silver disk. Its smooth, metallic surface reflected the waning light in a way that made it seem almost liquid, like a shard of some futuristic mirror embedded in the earth. I estimated its length to be between 50 and 75 yards, a size so vast that it dwarfed any conventional object one might expect in the desert. I noticed that several cars ahead had pulled over. Their drivers had stepped out, standing in clusters and moving slowly toward the enigmatic object. Groups of people lingered near it, their faces etched with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. I felt an intense pull, a desire to stop and inspect this oddity up close, to unravel the mystery of its presence. I eased my foot toward the brake, but in that split second, it was as if my foot was glued to the accelerator. I couldn't quite muster the will to halt, as if some invisible current had bound me to the wheel. For a fleeting moment, frustration surged through me. I wanted to get out, to join those gathering around this inexplicable phenomenon, yet something deeper urged me to continue onward. That internal conflict was swiftly replaced by an unexpected calm, a serene acceptance that maybe, just perhaps, it was for the best. I watched through my windshield as the silver disk remained motionless, an unyielding presence against the fading light, while curious onlookers approached it with tentative reverence. The memory of that encounter stayed with me long after the object had vanished from view. As I drove away, the desert reclaimed its familiar silence and the highway stretched out like a ribbon beneath the twilight sky. Yet every detail of that surreal moment, the glint of silver, the clustered figures of strangers in the dusk, and the inexplicable force that compelled me to keep moving, etched itself into my mind, a secret I carried like a hidden scar. In the days that followed, I found myself haunted by questions. What was that disk? Had it been a piece of advanced technology, a relic from an unknown world, or merely a trick of the light on a scorching day? I searched my memory for clues, replaying the scene over and over as I drove along similar highways in search of a sign, a confirmation that I wasn't merely imagining things. But the desert, vast and unyielding, offered no answers, only the quiet, indifferent passage of time. I recalled the expressions on the faces of those who had stopped. Their eyes were wide, yet strangely composed, as if they understood that some mysteries were meant to be witnessed rather than solved. In that moment, standing there in the warm glow of a fading summer, I realized that some encounters with the unknown are not invitations to inquiry, but silent messages to be felt. The disk had spoken in a language of light and shadow, a language that defied logic and demanded no explanation. That night, I pulled into a small roadside motel under a sky peppered with emerging stars. In the quiet solitude of my room, the memory of the silver disk played out like a half-remembered dream. I lay awake, the distant echo of that surreal encounter mingling with the soft sigh of the desert wind outside my window. I could almost feel the cool metal of the object, the calm radiating from it, a calm that had strangely soothed me even as I drove by, leaving me with a sense of anticlimactic peace. In the months that followed, I occasionally found myself returning to that stretch of highway in my thoughts, imagining the disk's silent vigil against the encroaching night. I wondered if it had been a mere anomaly of nature, an inexplicable quirk of light and shadow, or if it had been something more, a fleeting glimpse of a hidden layer of reality that most of us were never meant to see. Each time I closed my eyes, I could picture the silver surface, the curious crowd, and the moment when my own will had been overridden by a force both mysterious and oddly comforting. I never learned what that disk was, and perhaps that is its true purpose, to be a riddle that defies the confines of explanation. The experience left me with a lingering question about the nature of our reality. Are we alone in our orderly, comprehensible world, or do strange, uncharted phenomena lie just beyond the periphery of our vision, waiting to remind us that the universe is far more enigmatic than we dare to believe? Every so often, when I'm driving along a deserted stretch of highway or when the desert sky burns with the memory of a setting sun, I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a flash of silver that makes my heart quicken and my thoughts race. And in that moment, I remember that summer night in northern Arizona, the day when I encountered a mystery so vast and inexplicable that it left me with a calm acceptance, a silent acknowledgement that some things in this world are meant to be experienced, not understood. Redditor 7. I've never told anyone this before, but that night still haunts me with a clarity I can neither explain nor forget. I had just returned from deployment, and everything felt surreal. The world was both familiar and strangely alien. The barracks I was staying in were still under construction, a patchwork of unfinished corridors and echoing halls spread over 6 stories. I was assigned to the top floor of a building that loomed over the base like a silent sentinel. My room was at the very end of a long hall, right by the stairwell, where every creak and gust of wind carried whispers of a life I had longed to leave behind. The layout of the barracks was precise and confining. As soon as you opened the door into the common area, the kitchen was directly in front of you, with a small bathroom tucked off to the left. On either side of the common area were 2 rooms, their doors permanently locked since they were intended for a pair of soldiers to share. I was the only one assigned to the second room on the right-hand side. The left room remained sealed, its key forever out of my reach. It was a lonely existence, accentuated by the building's inherent coldness and the unyielding metal of its doors and windows. The kitchen window, in particular, was absurdly small, just a sliver of glass on a wall 6 stories above the ground, offering no escape from the vast isolation outside. That night was a weekday, and I knew I had to be at formation for PT at 630 the next morning. Exhausted by the rigors of deployment and the endless echo of my own thoughts, I went to bed early, trying to shut out the lingering memories of far-off battlefields. I slipped under the thin blanket, the coolness of the metal bed frame a constant reminder of my solitary situation, and finally allowed myself to drift into sleep. But sleep did not come gently that night. In the deep silence of the barracks, something stirred that I could not have predicted. I was awoken abruptly by a sensation so bizarre it seemed to belong to a dream, a momentary dislocation between body and mind. At first, I thought I was still caught in the fragile grip of sleep, when I noticed that my feet were floating. For a split second, I doubted my senses, wondering if the haze of exhaustion had conjured a surreal vision. But then, a deeper awareness crept in. My feet were being pulled, slowly, deliberately, toward the foot of the bed. I sat up, heart pounding in a rhythm that echoed through the silent corridor outside my room. My first instinct was to scream, to jolt myself fully awake, but the shock held me in place like an unseen force. The air around me grew inexplicably cold, and every muscle in my body screamed in protest as I struggled to understand what was happening. I looked down and saw with an almost clinical horror that my feet were indeed moving on their own, as if guided by some invisible puppeteer. There was no sound, no creak of the floor, no whisper of a draft that could account for this impossible movement. Time seemed to stretch, each second laden with an indescribable dread. I fought to regain control, to command my limbs back into submission, but the sensation was overwhelming. It wasn't pain exactly. It was more like a compelling tug, an irresistible pull that neither hurt nor comforted, but left me suspended between terror and disbelief. My mind raced through a million thoughts. Was this a hallucination born of fatigue, a remnant of combat stress, or something else entirely? A force that defied every law of nature I had come to trust? I could hear the soft hum of the building around me, the distant murmur of other soldiers sleeping, oblivious to the unnatural event unfolding in my room. The common area was locked down by the automated system as soon as the door closed, a system so secure that nothing could enter from the outside. There was no way someone, or something, had crept in through the main door, and the tiny kitchen window offered no passage for an intruder. It was as if the very fabric of the barracks had conspired to keep the world out, yet tonight it had let in something that shouldn't be there. The sensation of my feet being dragged intensified. I wanted to call out, to shout for help, but my voice was caught in the paralyzing grip of the moment. I could only watch in silent horror as my body betrayed me. Every instinct screamed to resist, yet the force was too potent, too insistent. It felt as though I were being drawn into the unknown, pulled toward a destiny I had never chosen. In that fleeting moment, I experienced a profound disconnection from myself, a terrifying glimpse of what it might mean to be no longer in command of one's own body. I struggled internally, willing myself to break free, to reclaim the control that was slipping away like sand through my fingers. My heart pounded louder, each beat a desperate plea for normalcy. I remembered the rigid discipline of military life, the training that emphasized control and order. And yet here, in the dead of night, I was utterly helpless. The room around me, with its cold, unyielding walls and flickering fluorescent lights, became a prison of my own making, a place where even sleep could not grant refuge. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the inexplicable sensation ceased. My feet stilled, as if the invisible force had finally released its grip, leaving behind only the echo of its presence in the silent room. I sat there, trembling and disoriented, the oppressive quiet of the barracks seeping back in. For long minutes I lay awake, trying to piece together the fragments of that surreal encounter. I questioned my sanity, wondering if the battle scars from deployment had finally caught up with me, or if something otherworldly had slipped into my reality through the cracks of the old building. As the first hints of dawn began to creep through the narrow window, I forced myself out of bed and moved toward the small, unremarkable doorway that led to the common area. I felt a lingering chill that no amount of morning light could dispel, a subtle reminder of the inexplicable night. At formation that morning, I maintained a stoic silence, masking the internal turmoil with a veneer of discipline. But every step I took, every breath I drew, was haunted by the memory of that moment when my own feet betrayed me. Even now, years later, I find myself questioning that night in the barracks. I have searched for logical explanations in the realms of science and stress-induced hallucinations, yet nothing fits the inexplicable pull I experienced. It is a memory that refuses to be confined to a single explanation, a riddle embedded deep within the confines of a cold, indifferent building. I often wonder if the old structure, with its creaking floors and locked doors, harbors secrets far beyond the mundane, a silent witness to forces that defy human understanding. Some nights, when the world outside is still and the darkness seems to whisper with hidden truths, I recall that night with a mixture of dread and reluctant fascination. I am left with an unsettling question. Was it merely a trick of a weary mind, or did something truly supernatural find its way into my life? Redditor 8. That night still clings to my memory like a half-remembered nightmare. I was upstairs in my room, the gentle hum of a quiet evening wrapping around me as I tried to unwind after a long day. The familiar creaks of our old house had always been a comfort, a reminder of its enduring presence. That night, however, everything changed with a single urgent call. I was barely drifting in the gray zone between sleep and wakefulness when I heard my dad's voice, sharp and insistent. "Come here, quick!" It sliced through the calm like a blade. My heart slammed in my chest as I scrambled out of bed, not even pausing to wonder what had disturbed the routine. I bolted down the creaking stairs, my pulse thrumming with a mix of adrenaline and dread. When I reached the living room, the space seemed eerily altered. The usual warm glow of our table lamp flickered uncertainly, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. My dad was already there, standing by the wide window that looked out over our front yard. His face was etched with an intensity I'd rarely seen, a mix of astonishment and an unspoken fear. Outside, to the north of our house, hovered a massive orange ball in the sky. The object was impossible to ignore. It was enormous, a perfect glowing orb that radiated an unsettling, almost otherworldly light. The orange hue was vivid, not the soft burn of a sunset, but a harsh, almost artificial brilliance that cut through the dusk. I stared, transfixed, as the ball hovered motionless, its surface shimmering with an intensity that made the rest of the sky feel dim by comparison. Dad had his phone out, desperately trying to capture what we were witnessing. He pressed buttons and adjusted angles, but every time he played back the video, the screen was nothing more than a blank, static void. It was as if the ball refused to be recorded, its image evading the digital grasp of our technology. The inexplicable silence was even more unnerving. No hum, no buzz, just the sound of our own breathing and the faint rustle of the evening wind. For nearly 3 minutes, the orange orb maintained its vigil above us. Time seemed to stretch, each second laden with a tension that made the air feel heavier, thicker, almost as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. I remember feeling both terrified and oddly mesmerized, caught in a limbo where rational thought had little power. Every fiber in my body screamed for an explanation, yet no thought could bridge the chasm between what I knew and what I was witnessing. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the ball stirred. It darted diagonally across the sky with a speed that made my stomach lurch, slicing through the silence like a flash of forbidden light. I could only watch in silent horror as it then shot straight upward, vanishing beyond the reach of my gaze in an instant. One moment it was there, a looming, vibrant anomaly. The next it had dissolved into the darkness above, leaving behind only the ghost of its light. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my mind reeling from the surreal spectacle. My dad remained by the window, his eyes still fixed on the empty sky, as if expecting the orb to reappear at any moment. The room, once a sanctuary of familiar comfort, had transformed into a stage for an inexplicable performance. A performance that defied all logic and defiled the natural order of things. Reluctantly, I turned away from the window and headed back inside, my mind a tumult of unanswered questions and unspoken fears. As I crossed the threshold into the inner sanctum of our home, I immediately sensed that something was amiss. Our TV remote lay on the coffee table, its buttons unresponsive, and the cable box, usually a steadfast companion for our nightly routines, was caught in a perpetual cycle of resetting. The screen flickered in a series of erratic bursts, as if the electronic heartbeat of our home had been disturbed by that bizarre phenomenon. I sat down slowly on the worn sofa, the weight of the experience pressing down on me. The broken remote and the malfunctioning cable box were small anomalies in an otherwise orderly household, yet in that moment, they felt like harbingers of a deeper, more unsettling disturbance. Had the event outside somehow seeped into our very walls, disrupting not just the sky but the fabric of our daily lives? For a long while, I sat in silence, the only sound the occasional buzz of a faulty circuit or the creak of the settling house. I replayed the scene over and over in my mind, the urgent call of my dad, the surreal, glowing orange ball, the desperate attempts to capture it on video, and its inexplicable departure. I tried to rationalize what I had seen, to ground it in some explanation that would make sense. But nothing in that moment, no matter how deeply I searched, could account for the terror and wonder of that encounter. I remember thinking that perhaps some cosmic force had briefly brushed against our small world, leaving behind a sign that was both beautiful and terrifying. The vastness of the sky suddenly felt more mysterious, its endless expanse hiding secrets that defied our understanding. I wondered if that glowing orb was a message from another realm, a silent visitor that, for a fleeting moment, crossed the boundary between our mundane existence and something far more profound. As the night deepened, I found little solace in the familiar surroundings of our home. The broken TV remote, the resetting cable box, even the way the shadows moved oddly on the walls. All of it conspired to remind me that the normalcy I once took for granted had been irrevocably altered. I lay awake in bed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, haunted by the thought that somewhere in the vast dark sky, something extraordinary had made its mark on my life. In the days that followed, I searched for answers in quiet moments and whispered conversations, but the mystery remained as elusive as the vanishing light of that orange ball. My dad tried to rationalize it away, insisting it was some kind of optical illusion or a trick of the fading light, but deep down, I knew there was more to it. The experience had shattered my complacency, leaving behind a lingering sense of both wonder and dread, a constant reminder that our world, with all its orderly routines, might sometimes open a door to the inexplicable. Even now, years later, whenever I catch a glimpse of a vibrant glow in the twilight or feel an inexplicable chill in the air, I am transported back to that night. I remember the sound of my dad's urgent call, the surreal hovering orb, and the subtle disconcerting signs that something beyond our control had brushed against our lives. Redditor 9. I still remember that surreal afternoon in the mid-90s, a day etched into my memory with both vivid clarity and a nagging uncertainty. I was with my mom and a few of her friends at a secluded lake somewhere in Southern California, far from the usual hum of city life. The lake was hidden away in a quiet valley, its placid surface mirroring the endless blue of the sky, while two colossal mountains guarded it on either side like silent, timeless sentinels. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and earth, and the distant murmur of water over rocks lent the landscape an almost hypnotic calm. We had chosen that spot for its isolation, a temporary escape from the clamor of everyday responsibilities. My mom, ever the free spirit, had invited a couple of her closest friends to join her for what was meant to be a carefree retreat. I was young then, barely on the cusp of adolescence, and my impressions were a mix of innocent wonder and the quiet, unspoken tension that comes from sensing something just a bit out of place. Even now, years later, I can't say for sure if I fully understood what I witnessed that day. The afternoon had started innocently enough. We spread out a faded, checkered blanket on the soft grass near the lake's edge and unpacked a cooler filled with sodas and snacks. The heat of the California sun wrapped around us, and the shimmering waves of the lake played tricks with the light, scattering flecks of gold across our makeshift picnic area. My mom and her friends were laughing and talking animatedly, a carefree group sharing stories and memories as the hours drifted by. I remember how their voices seemed to merge with the natural chorus of chirping birds and rustling leaves, creating a symphony that felt both familiar and strangely otherworldly. At some point, as we relaxed and watched the day slowly transition into the gentle hues of late afternoon, one of my mom's friends, a vivacious woman with a mischievous smile, suddenly sat up and pointed toward the distant peaks. "Expletive, look at that," she exclaimed, her voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. We all followed her gaze, squinting against the fading sunlight that filtered through the scattered clouds. There, suspended high between the two towering mountains and floating just above the lake, was a sight that froze us in our tracks. A classic UFO, at least by every description we had ever seen in movies or read in sensational headlines. The object was unmistakable in its geometry. It was a perfect metallic disc with a smooth, reflective surface that caught the light in an almost hypnotic way. For a few heartbeats, time seemed to pause. We watched, transfixed, as the silver orb hovered effortlessly against the rugged backdrop of the mountains. Its presence was unnervingly calm, a silent anomaly that defied every expectation of nature. The outline of the disc shimmered as if it were made of liquid metal, and there was a faint luminescence that traced its edges, a glow that made it stand out starkly against the deepening blue of the sky. For me, the moment felt like an intrusion into our otherwise mundane world, a sudden breach of reality that left my young mind both terrified and exhilarated. I remember feeling a prickle of unease, as if the object carried with it a secret too immense to be understood, a message from a realm beyond our everyday comprehension. Yet, amid the growing sense of dread, there was also an inexplicable calm that washed over me. Perhaps it was the haze of that summer day, or maybe it was the influence of my mom's friends, whose eyes sparkled with a mix of amusement and altered perception. I later learned that they were high as a kite that day, a detail that muddied the line between genuine wonder and the distortions of an intoxicated mind. My mom, on the other hand, maintained a cool, almost detached curiosity. While her friends giggled and exchanged knowing glances, she observed the scene with an inscrutable expression. The way she looked at that mysterious orb suggested that, in her own way, she recognized that this was no ordinary phenomenon, even if the drugs in the air made everything seem a touch surreal. I couldn't tell if she was amused, concerned, or simply resigned to the inexplicable nature of the moment. For what felt like several endless minutes, we stood there, my mom, her friends, and me, our eyes locked on the hovering disc. The silence that enveloped us was profound, broken only by the soft lapping of water against the shore and the distant call of a bird retreating to its nest. Every so often, one of us would exchange a look, a silent acknowledgement that something extraordinary was unfolding before our very eyes, something that defied easy explanation. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, the orb began to shift. It started to descend slowly, its movement deliberate and almost graceful, as if it were navigating an unseen current in the air. I remember feeling a twinge of disappointment, a sense of loss, as the moment seemed to slip away. In that brief span, the disc dipped toward the lake, glinting with a final burst of reflective brilliance before vanishing behind the rugged silhouette of the mountains. In the space where it had floated, the sky returned to its ordinary state, the only evidence of its presence the lingering questions and the collective, unspoken awe among us. As we eventually resumed our conversation, the details of what we had seen began to blur and merge with the hazy recollections of a day filled with laughter and altered perceptions. My mom and her friends shrugged it off, treating it as a bizarre, funny anecdote to be recounted at future gatherings, a shared secret wrapped in the ambiguity of memory. But for me, the experience planted a seed of uncertainty that has grown over the years. I often find myself questioning whether that sight was a genuine encounter with something beyond our world or merely a trick of the mind in a moment of heightened suggestibility. Redditor 10. I had just finished a long shift at work and was driving home around 1 or 2 in the morning. Living on a peninsula, I was well accustomed to the isolation and quiet that comes with the dark hours, yet nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to witness. The road twisted through empty streets as I navigated the familiar route, my headlights slicing through the inky darkness. As I neared a side street close to where I lived, I caught sight of a Baptist church standing solemnly in the distance. Something about the church struck me immediately as odd. The usually bright and welcoming parking lot was shrouded in darkness, an eerie void where light should have been. Amid that black expanse, one singular blinking red light stood out. It pulsed like the heartbeat of some distant, malfunctioning device, its rhythm erratic and unsettling, not following any pattern I could discern. I slowed my car, drawn inexplicably toward the phenomenon. As I approached, the red light became more distinct, revealing itself not as a stray beacon on a phone tower, but as part of something far more extraordinary. Hovering directly above the steeple of the church was what could only be described as a giant airship. It loomed roughly 150 feet above the weathered spire, its form outlined against the night sky in a way that defied all expectation. The airship was long and cylindrical, its shape smooth and unyielding. There was no discernible front or back, no wings or rotary blades to suggest any conventional means of propulsion. Instead, the only features that broke the monotony of its surface were the large vent-like protrusions along its length, each one exuding a pale white light that contrasted sharply with the dominant red blinking light fixed in its center. The entire craft floated there in utter stillness, making no sound, no engine hum, no buzz, nothing that could hint at how it managed to defy gravity and logic. For about 3 long, tense minutes, I sat there in the driver's seat, transfixed by the sight. Every instinct in me screamed that this was not something that should be happening, a violation of the natural order. I fumbled for my phone, a clunky old BlackBerry with a 2-megapixel camera, desperate to capture proof of what I was seeing. My hands trembled as I tried to steady them, and I even considered retrieving my DSLR from the back of the car, but before I could act, the entire scene shifted in a heartbeat. The airship began to drift sideways, as if buoyed by an unseen current, moving with the graceful unpredictability of a balloon caught in a gentle gust. My pulse quickened, and a strange mix of awe and dread surged through me. I parked the car and made a move toward the back, determined to set up my camera for a better shot. But the moment I shifted the gear into park and turned my head to retrieve the DSLR, the craft reacted. In what felt like half a second, it darted diagonally across the sky, then shot straight upward in a burst of speed that defied comprehension. I watched, rooted to the spot, as it vanished into the night, leaving behind nothing but an echo of red and white in the heavens. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there for several agonizing minutes, my mind racing to reconcile what I had witnessed with every rational explanation I knew. There were no sounds of engines, no lingering glow, just the oppressive darkness of the early morning and the faint hum of my own heartbeat. I sat back in my car, a cold sweat forming on my brow, trying to piece together a semblance of logic out of the inexplicable. It wasn't until weeks later that I began to truly question the nature of that night. A vivid dream crept into my sleep, one that felt as real as the memory of that encounter. In the dream, I was in my bed when the room grew unnaturally cold. I heard a low, rhythmic humming, and then I saw them, creatures, indistinct and alien, crawling through the window. Their movements were jerky, as if they were suspended in a nightmare between sleep and wakefulness. They advanced slowly, their eyes hidden in shadow, and they muttered in a language that was part shriek, part series of sharp clicking sounds, a sound that burrowed into my mind long after I awoke. I remember the terror of that dream vividly. I lay in my bed, frozen in place, as the creatures edged closer. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, yet my body refused to obey. The room was filled with that same oppressive silence I had experienced on that fateful night, a silence that seemed to confirm that something beyond human understanding was at work. When I finally managed to break free from the paralysis and bolt upright, I could only tell myself it was just a nightmare, an echo of the strange encounter with the airship. But even as I reassured myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow connected. In the days that followed, I revisited every detail of that night, wondering if there was a link between the mysterious airship and the creatures in my dream. Was it possible that what I had seen was not merely a trick of the light or a malfunctioning piece of technology, but rather a glimpse into a reality that exists parallel to our own? The more I pondered it, the more the unanswered questions gnawed at me. There were no rational explanations that fit the events. A massive, silent craft that defied the known laws of physics, disappearing in an instant. A dream so vivid and disturbing that it felt like a message or a warning from some hidden realm. I sometimes drive by that same stretch of road, hoping for a hint of that strange red light to reappear, a sign that might offer some clarity. But the nights remain silent, and the church stands quietly in the distance, its parking lot once again illuminated by familiar, comforting lights. Yet in the quiet moments before sleep, I still feel that lingering chill, a reminder that once something extraordinary brushed against my reality, leaving me with questions that have yet to be answered. I've long come to accept that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, that the universe occasionally presents us with enigmas that defy our need for logic. But every now and then, when the night is especially still, I wonder if I'm the only one left with this secret, a memory of a night when the sky opened up and revealed a glimpse of the impossible. And even now, I can't help but feel that somewhere out there in the vast darkness, that red light might one day return.